Easter Sunday, 1985, and several hundred of us, mainly armed with Japanese cameras, have turned out to photograph a couple of old steam locomotives, one of them the King George V, built nearly 60 years ago. The idea is for them to pull a train from Bristol to Plymouth to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Great Western Railway. It's raining. At British Rail's Bath Road depot at Bristol, the raindrops are glistening like sweat on the oily skins of the great engines. Fire and water and steel combined in an elemental expression of national achievement. When the world still depended on steam and the railways, no one built better than this. The GWR grew out of the vision of one man, a vision of a level, broad-gauge link between London and Bristol. In 1835, Isambard Kingdom Brunel was at 29 engineer to the new Great Western Railway.
The railway is now in progress. I am their engineer to the finest work in England. A handsome salary, £2,000 a year, on excellent terms with my directors, and all going smoothly.
What wasn't going smoothly was the locomotives. Brunel, brilliant as a civil engineer, was having less success as a locomotive designer. He badly needed someone else who could do it better. At the age of 20, Daniel Gooch applied for the job.
Manchester and Leeds Railway Office, Rochdale, July the 18th, 1837. Dear Sir, I have just been informed it is your intention to erect an engine manufactory and that you wish to engage a person as manager. I take the earliest opportunity of offering my services for the situation. I am anxious to engage myself to some company where I will have the management of the building of engines. I am, sir, yours obediently, Daniel Gooch.
Brunel was clear about the need for a principal engine establishment, a central engine station, Gooch was to call it. Its purpose:
to provide an engine establishment at Swindon commensurate with the wants of the company, where a change of engines may be advantageously made and the train stopped for the purpose of passengers taking refreshment.
It was Gooch who saw the virtues of building in the green fields of Wiltshire, where the line from Cheltenham met the route to Bristol. In 1841, a start was made on the works and a village to house the employees. Gooch had already designed his first GWR engine, and it worked well. 2 years later, Swindon was operational. Within months, there were 420 men on the payroll. In 1985, the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the beginning of all this was a reminder of what exciting times they were. Railways were changing the world. By the mid-1840s, Swindon was making the world's fastest trains. In 1847, the Iron Duke, recreated in replica for the anniversary, hauled passengers from London to Bristol in 2.5 hours. In another 2 hours, the traveller could reach Exeter. At Swindon, passengers were given 10 whole minutes to spend their money in the refreshment room. Brunel's broad gauge, more than 2 feet wider than everyone else's railway, reached into the west and north to Wolverhampton. The Swindon Works was by then employing 1,800 people. Most were to lose their jobs by the end of that year. Sudden redundancy isn't new, but eventually Swindon became one of the largest railway factories in Europe, with 14,000 people on the payroll. If the spirit of the Great Western Railway still survived, it would surely be here, and that was what I was looking for. Beyond the high-speed trains which still use Brunel's finest work in England, I began my search for that indefinable spirit. The main offices with their reminders over the door of Swindon's earliest years, the offices used by the great Swindon engineers. William Dean, in charge when the broad gauge was scrapped, his Agamemnon, one of the most elegant of Swindon products. George Jackson Churchward, who succeeded him. His Evening Star, built in 1907, is said to have been his masterpiece. Churchward's boilers, they say, influenced the whole world of locomotive engineering. And C.B. Collett, who followed Churchward, and whose reign at Swindon saw the creation of the legendary Castles and Kings. My search, then, began with a call on the head of personnel at Swindon, very much a man with GWR roots.
Ah, you must be Alan Martin.
Alan Martin's memories of the Swindon works go back to the early 1940s, the war years. But he'd found for me a guide whose family association with the place went back even further, Ted Jeffries.
Ted, would you come in, please?
Alan's family is pure Great Western on both sides. He started in 1943 as a very junior clerk on less than £1 a week. They were hectic days.
Yes, we were doing our normal workload at that time, and the workers were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that included bank holidays and usually at Christmas as well.
And a lot of the workshops given over to, as you say,
Yes, yes, or part of the workshops, yes.
Ah, here it must be Ted.
Ah, yes, this is Ted. Ted, this is Mr. Brown from the BBC. He's looking for the spirit of the GWR.
Follow me, let's see if we can find out.
Ted, I'll follow you. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Right over.
The last steam locomotive was built here in 1960, so the first surprise was to discover that most of the skills needed to repeat the golden age of trains that were Swindon built still survived. The announcement that Swindon must close altogether had yet to come. Outside, there's a new Swindon, owing nothing to the railway. But the memory of an all-powerful GWR is still rooted in the way Ted Jeffries views the town.
Yes, my wife's grandfather enjoyed telling us about the early days when his father walked from Highworth to Swindon, which is a distance of some 6 miles to come to work, starting off 10 to 4 in the morning and coming home at 10 past 8 at night. It's a long way, but it was slightly shortened because Brunel had the power and got the footpaths straightened out.
But he actually took a bill through
Parliament
Parliament
and got the footpaths straightened out. It just shows how powerful the railways were. This is one of the old relics of the past.
Great Western?
Oh, it's a Great Western, and it's a water tank that was pulled behind steam engines. And in the background there is the old Gov van that was used for newspapers.
A couple of the last bits of Great Western rolling stock left.
This is the final bit.
Already it was evident that there was more of the GWR left at Swindon than a few rusting relics. This is how it looked in 1908. Replaced steam with diesel, and not much had changed by 1985. Men who had worked here 60 years before would find most of it still familiar. Many of the processes had not changed much either. Once there were 3 foundries in the Swindon works. The one that remains is to survive, making non-ferrous bits and pieces for British Rail. Locomotive nameplates, for instance. British Rail all but did away with them at one stage until the marketing men restored them to favour. Hundreds of foundries in Britain have closed in the past few years. Along with the rest of the Swindon works, this one was due to close too. Then it was reprieved. So, here at least, the foundry men can go on applying their ancient skills, working up a thirst, and making their ironic comment on a changing world. The process begins even earlier in the pattern shop. Making castings requires patterns, and making a pattern still demands a mixture of craftsman and artist. Ever since Gooch, there had always been a new generation of craftsmen in the making at Swindon. In charge of both foundry and pattern shop was Alec Elliott.
It's an absolute Aladdin's cave of a place, isn't it? What have we got here?
Well, we've got about 19,000 different patterns for non-ferrous details. For instance, this, I mean, there's a...
What, that's a door handle?
That's a door handle, cast in yellow brass.
All the non-ferrous bits
and letters.
Oh, that's letters of a nameplate?
A nameplate, yes. The old GWR type letters.
So you've got all the non-ferrous bits that are currently being used by British Rail?
That's right, yes. And they're used in our foundry, of course.
Does that mean that if you set out to do it, you could build another King George V in Swindon?
It would be very difficult to do that, actually, because we don't hold the patterns for the ferrous or for the steel, so consequently we couldn't quite reckon to do that. But we would have a go at it. But
now these are what? What are these? These are
yes,
trays.
these are the old headboards that used to go on the steam locos. Do you remember those?
Gosh, this would
that's right.
stir blood from here to
Cheltenham Express.
The other side of America. There must be millions of people all over the world who would see something like that and they would think of what? Paynton and Saltash Bridge and Heberden Bank.
Yes, you can almost smell the smoke.
Yes.
Many of those eagerly braving a wet Sunday to see the King George V associate the spirit of the GWR with Swindon's hallmark, distinctive trimmings of copper and brass. Like the big locomotive itself, which could throw grit in your eye and smut on your new hat, they may not have been very efficient, but the sight and sound and smell of it all surely symbolize mechanical power at its peak. And evidently, much of the skill and pride built into it still survives at Swindon. I'd begun to see why the Americans wanted to hang a bell on it in 1927. As for skill, imagine taking a sheet of metal and a soldering iron and making a tail lamp. And then watch Colin Bown. Not the sort of thing that will help us keep up with those clever Japanese, you may think. But clearly, the spirit of the GWR still survives in this corner of the works.
Oil-burning tail lamps. Why should anybody be making those in, what, 1985?
Well, presumably because they haven't found anything better yet. I should think so. I don't really know.
Do you remember making these for the Great Western?
Yes, when I was an apprentice, I worked on lamps in those days.